Now that we have this image placed in our layout, the first thing we're going to want to do is scale it. As you can see here, it doesn't quite fit the page, so make sure that the selection tool, that is the black arrow tool, is active, and we can click in this frame to move it around. Now to scale it, you might be tempted to come up to one of these corners, and because you're savvy with graphics applications, you're going to hold the Shift key because you know that that will constrain proportions. That means our image won't become distorted. So pressing Shift, we're going to click and scale this image down, make it really tiny, and let go. Uh-oh, that's not quite what we expected. Well, for better or for worse, InDesign scales images a little bit differently than what you might be used to. So go ahead and press Command-Z on the Mac or Control-Z on Windows to revert that last step. And here's the trick. You have to hold down one more keyboard shortcut. Now Shift does retain proportions, but you need to add the Command key on Macintosh or the Control key on Windows. The Shift constrains proportions, the Command key modifies both the frame and the content. Pressing Shift and Command, Shift Control on Windows, scale that down. Now you get what you'd expect. So another important change here in InDesign CS3 is how scaling is calculated. So if we look up here in the control panel, we can see that this frame is now about half the size, actually 51%. The old behavior was a little bit more convoluted in previous versions of InDesign. There was all sorts of different calculations for the frame and the content. To be honest with you, it was kind of confusing. InDesign CS3 does have a new preference. Make sure you press Command-K on the Mac or Control-K on Windows. And here in the General category, to take advantage of this new scaling behavior, make sure that you have Adjust Scaling Percentage on. Apply to Content is the old behavior. This option is the new behavior, and I definitely suggest you enable that feature. So go ahead and click OK. We can move this image up here in the middle of the column, and we're going to do a few more things with this content. Let's zoom in a little bit on this image by pressing Command-2 or Control-2 on Windows to zoom in to 200%. And we've scaled this image down, and inevitably that's going to affect the resolution in terms of print quality for this image. So to get a sense of what's happening, make sure that the image is still selected and come up here on the right-hand side and open the Info panel. Here in the Info panel, we actually get some really helpful information. Here at the bottom of the panel, InDesign is telling us the file format. In this case, it's a Photoshop document. Under that, it tells us the actual PPI, that is the original resolution of the file. In this case, was 300 pixels per inch. Below that, it tells us our effective PPI. This is really important because in this scenario, we took an image and scaled it down. That means the effective resolution is going up. We're squeezing the same amount of pixels in a smaller space. However, if you take an image and scale it up in InDesign, the effective resolution is actually going to decrease. So make sure you're in good communication with your printer or your production department to understand your minimum resolution for your printing process. Frequently, that's about 250 to 300 dpi depending on your paper type and your printing press. So if you see an effective resolution of something like 72 or 100, that's probably not going to be good enough to get a high quality print. You also see some other options here at the bottom, including the color space of the file. If this said RGB and you were intending to print this on a high-end press, that might be an issue that you need to look at, as well as any ICC profiles in case you're doing color management. So I'm going to dismiss the info panel for now and explain just a few other aspects to working with frames and images. Up to now, everything we've done so far is using the selection tool. That's the black arrow tool. Now, using that black arrow tool, we can actually manipulate the frame independent of the content. For example, if I use the black arrow tool to click and drag one of the sides of these frames, we can actually crop that content. Now, related to the black arrow tool is the white arrow tool, which is known as the direct selection tool. The direct selection tool allows us to get a little bit more detailed. So we'll grab that tool. And now we have features, for example, we can grab individual points of the frame and manipulate the frame. So we can use that white arrow tool to play with the frame, really customize it, make it the shape and size that we want. Command-Z on the Mac or Control-Z on Windows. I'll undo those last couple of steps because there's another way that the direct selection tool is very handy. If your frame is smaller than the content that's inside that frame, again, think of the frame kind of like a bucket, and your image is the content in that bucket, you can move the content around inside that frame. For example, with the white arrow tool, I'll just click and hold on that image, and you can see the edges of the content that are hanging outside of the visible frame. So I can move that into position however I'd like, and I can get a different crop of that same image. Another way to take advantage of the direct selection tool is with a feature that's called patient user mode. I don't know if that's really the technical term, but you have to be patient to use this feature. Here's how it works. With the white arrow tool selected, click and hold. Don't just click and move, click and hold for a moment. And then as soon as you do that, you can move that image around in its frame, seeing what's going to be cropped. When you have it just where you'd like it, go ahead and let go, and now you can see the resulting crop. Instead of moving it and letting go and guessing, moving it, letting go and guessing, you have that real-time crop preview.